Hi everyone, this is Kevin Wagner, the Keto Advocate. In January of 2016, I had the privilege to sit down and chat with ketogenic dietitian Miriam Kalamian at the first annual conference on nutritional ketosis and metabolic therapeutics held in Tampa, Florida. Let's see what Miriam had to say.
Okay, well, I'm Miriam Kalamian, and I am a keto nutritionist and educator. And specifically, it's keto for cancer. That's my specialty. I do work with other conditions as well, especially things like healthy aging, but my experience and my passion really are in the cancer. I came to this because my son was, we discovered my young son, he was 4 years old, he had a brain tumor, and we discovered that in 2004. And we did the standard of care because that's what we were told would be effective for him, but it wasn't. And it wasn't until the spring of 2007 when we really had absolutely no other acceptable options. And that wasn't acceptable to us, that I literally stumbled on Dr. Seyfried's research, found his paper online that had just been published that day, and now they were announcing the publication. Immediately sent an email to him, and he was just incredible. He sent me papers, some resources, got me connected with the Charlie Foundation, told me about Linda Nebeling's study, because my son was 7. So it's like I didn't want to harm him with something. But I also realized that what we had already done to him had been the bigger harm. So within a few weeks, we were up and running with the diet. We weren't doing it well, but we were doing it nonetheless, and within 3 months his tumor had stopped growing for the first time. So, to us that was amazing, and we hung in there with the diet, and he had 3 incredible good years of good quality of life that he wasn't going to get. And then he had 3 kind of rough years, some good periods and some bad periods. But that was a gift to us, and in that time, when I saw how powerful that diet was, I just, we got the good MRI in June, and I was enrolled in a grad program by August. And because I knew that there was nobody out there at the time that was going to help us. And if this was going to work for him, it was going to come from me. So, that's the beginning of the story, and where it rolls from there is, my entire focus while I was in the grad program, it was through Eastern Michigan, was how am I going to adapt this for ketogenic diet for cancer? I really value my colleagues, and I value collaboration, and this has been an amazing opportunity to actually just walk up to somebody and ask a question, somebody that I've been emailing with her. There's just, the amount of knowledge that's in this building, I don't think it can be replicated anywhere else in the world. I think this is it. And, it'll be in Banff too, but these are the people that have the answers. And they just need the funding, and that's all they need. They have the ideas. They need the funding to be able to move it to the next step. And in the environment that we have, we don't get the funding for diet studies. We don't get the funding for non-toxic, already FDA-approved therapies. What you get the funding for is the targeted, the targeted thing here and the targeted thing there that's going to help a few people here and there. But it's not going to address the root cause of the problem. And the ketogenic diet, it's so much more than what people view it as initially. They look at it and they go, starving glucose. Okay, starving your cancer, okay, by limiting the availability of glucose. And that's true. It's doing that. But it's also impacting all of these other pathways that are related to cancer. And that's the important message. And that's the thing that's not getting out to a lot of people, and I understand that, but worse, it's not getting out to the medical community. Because if they understood it was about pathways, they may be a little more open to it. When they hear it's about starving your cancer of glucose, they go, just another diet. My entire focus while I was in the grad program, it was through Eastern Michigan, was how am I going to adapt this for ketogenic diet for cancer? What am I, how am I going to take the basic information about nutrition and make this work for people with cancer? And I've done that. I've really done it, and I can feel really good about it. But what still needs to happen is a lot more people have to know what I know. There's only a few people that have the in-depth. I've worked with like 400 people so far. So there aren't that many people that have had it in depth, and so many of the people I talk to are so afraid to go to begin this with cancer. They've done it for epilepsy, they've done it for diabetes, or they've done it for weight loss, but they see that there's much more risk with cancer, and there's many more challenges with cancer. We've talked about some of them. Number one for me is people who are doing this as an adjuvant are in the standard of care, so they have all of the treatment-related side effects, and with the treatment-related side effects, people are directed to drink Ensure or Boost, because they're not going to be able to digest a high-fat meal. So drink Ensure or Boost. Eat what feels good. Diet doesn't matter. Diet doesn't matter. Diet doesn't matter. Well, diet does matter, but when you hear that from your medical team that diet doesn't matter, immediately puts up a barrier. And my job, their job is to commit to the diet. People, they understand it well enough, and I'll help them understand it. I'll spend hours helping them understand it. But their job is to commit to the diet, and then my job is to make it work. Yeah, Dr. Seyfried brought up today some research that needs to be done with limiting glutamine. And I don't mean the dietary aspect of limiting glutamine, because you can't really do it. It's an amino acid, you need it. But being able to suppress the action of glutamine in terms of cancer progression. And he needs funding for that study. He's got the ideas, but he needs funding. And then I look at like all of these wonderful new ketone supplements that have come out, and and that's Dr. D'Agostino behind all that. But I don't know how to use them with people with cancer. I see how they're being used in weight loss, but what is going to be best practice? So I guess that's if I were to pick something, it would be best practice. How can we get the best practice guidelines for cancer and for some of these other diseases too? I think we're getting there with diabetes. We're getting there with metabolic, but we're not getting there yet with cancer. They did it years ago with epilepsy, best practice, and we need the same kind of thing. And we need certification. We need education and certification, so that when I do have somebody that I'm working with, I have a team that I can send them to. Okay, you live in St. Louis, this is your team. Oh, you live in Dallas, this is your team. We don't have that yet. We don't have the support. A couple of years ago, I was contacted by a woman. She had been diagnosed with metastatic disease. This was terminal. Her treatment plan was going to be purely palliative. She got right on board with the diet. She had incredible support from her family and her friends. And it was just amazing to see the transformation there. She was not able, as being necessary for a ketogenic diet, but it didn't matter because she was heavy to start with. And so her stored fat became the source of her ketones, and she made ketones like crazy. And her blood glucose levels dropped, so she was in that therapeutic zone. And it was really a wonderful thing. So she comes up against her first MRI, or actually it was a CAT scan. And there's no evidence of disease. And her local doctor was very reserved about it, but the doctor that she saw in the specialty clinic said he'd never seen anything like that before, and he wouldn't rule out that it had to do with the diet. So what does she do? She goes and she celebratory cruise with her family. She falls off the diet while on the cruise, and she never got back on track. And it had everything to do with how we equate food with love. And the comfort foods were too compelling for her. So there was just no way to work around that. We could come up with foods that were similar to the comfort foods, but it didn't work for her. It was a real struggle. And then I get other people who, sometimes I think, well, I can't work with this person. They're coming from a Western diet. What am I going to do with this? And I've had to send a picture of a steamer basket, a vegetable steamer basket, and give instructions on how to steam a vegetable, and thinking, I'm never going to hear from this guy again. And then like months later, emails me, tells me he loves this new way of doing things, and he's doing great. And I did a really simple meal template. I didn't expect him to calculate, protein. I just figured it all out for him and handed it to him. And he pretty much did it the same thing every day. And he was doing great. And that was unexpected too on my part. And then people say, vegans, well, you can't work with vegans. You have to be able to eat meat. Well, you don't have to be able to eat meat, because the protein needs for somebody with cancer, with somebody with a solid tumor in particular, are so low that when you look at what the RDA, the recommendations for protein are, they're really low. We eat so much more protein than we need. So I had this vegan couple come to me, and she had been diagnosed with a glioblastoma, and that's a brain cancer. It's deadly. She was told 14 months, and that was with the standard of care. And the standard of care for her was resection surgery, and that went well. They got a good part of the tumor out. And then she went into the second phase of that, which is radiation and chemotherapy. Well, she got about 3 weeks into the chemotherapy, and she had an allergic reaction. So she had to discontinue the drug. And that's when they panicked. What are we going to do? I get contacted, and here I am working with a vegan, and how's this going to work? Well, her husband, this was 3 years ago, and her husband was just amazing. He did all the calculations. He got it all figured out. I was concerned about the low amount of, I thought that the protein was just barely adequate. But she has done amazingly well. She's 3 years out on glioblastoma with no chemotherapy. She did finish the radiation, but no chemotherapy. And there's been a little, on an MRI there'll be a little enhancement here, and on another one it goes away, and there's a little artifact over here that they're concerned about. But every time the medical team has panicked, they've kept their cool, and she's never had to do anything else. She is combining several metabolic therapies, and that was talked about today. A couple of different people are talking about non-toxic combinations of drugs. So she is doing that, but she's not tied to the oncology clinic, which is what happens with people with GBM. You're tied to the clinic from the time of your diagnosis to the time of your death. That's your life. And that, they're living their life. They go on vacation. They take these beach vacations. They took a month and visit her family. They're living their lives. They're still working and enjoying life. And that's what it's all about. It's not a cure for her, but she has a very good quality of life. 3 years out.
I don't mean to interject, but with that particular example, I mean, it almost sounds like a case of managing the cancer for an indefinite period of time.
Managing, that's what you're doing. You're managing the cancer, exactly.
Disease rather than
Yeah, I could say that. And I didn't address what you said about and I should, because nausea and vomiting and constipation are just part and parcel, and it's so much harder to work with somebody who's in the standard of care. So when somebody's, when they start, it's really great if they're newly diagnosed. Because they haven't really gotten into that yet. We can anticipate some of these problems that they're going to have with the standard of care, with nausea, vomiting, constipation, or diarrhea. And I can look at what foods they like and try to plan, to make the plan fit their food preferences. And I think that's really important for everybody, not just for people with cancer. But boy, you gotta be there for them for the first several weeks, even the first month, because they are going to be experiencing problems with adapting to the high-fat diet. They don't have any trouble cutting carbs. They understand how to do that. They basically understand how to limit protein. And they're not all that hungry, so that becomes an easier part of it. But increasing the intake of fat is really very challenging for people because of what we've been told about fat. But if they're heavy, this is not an issue. It's a lot more work if they are farther along. They've been struggling with this for years. They've lost a lot of weight. We have some concerns about weight. We have some concerns about nutrition because their digestive system's not working very well. And then, then there's a whole different set of issues, and I approach it very differently. I have to stray from the standard of, 12 grams of carb is going to be what's good for you. And instead we just pick out the low glycemic carbs, but still keep it low, but not at 12. I want them to have more of a range of nutrients. I'm more concerned about their nutrition 2 years into it than I am when they start the diet. Because if they're heavy, they are going to make ketones like crazy, and they are going to have one of those amazing responses to treatment. That's what the doctors will say. You've had an amazing response to treatment. They don't acknowledge that part of that amazing response has come from the effect of the diet. And calorie restriction, by not being able to take in enough fat in the early part of this because of the nausea and vomiting, calorie restriction can actually enhance the effect of the diet. So I want enough of that going on to put some pressure on the tumor, put some pressure on the system to adapt to it. That adaptive response can move people in a healthy direction while it's killing off the tumor cells. But too much of that is a problem because it impacts the immune system. And people really need a healthy immune system in order to fight cancer. I don't monitor it. I leave it up to them, but the people who are going to be successful with this at least understand what their baselines are and what they're doing. And that's the perfect way to get the feedback. Getting feedback from, I'm the cheerleader. I'll tell them whether they're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction. But it doesn't take very long of me doing that before they've figured it out for themselves. But what better way to get feedback than from your own body? Because, what I eat and how my body responds to it is very different than how your body would respond to the same food. So we can't compare our responses, but we can compare our numbers. And if I'm seeing the numbers that work for them, that's much more important than what they're taking in or what the prescription for the macronutrients is. It's all about the numbers. So, I really encourage people to do that. The other thing about monitoring, not so much with blood monitoring, but I know that people talk about urine ketones and how they're not a good indicator. In the first few months, I think that they're really important from a compliance end. Because if you're testing your ketones, urine ketones 3 times a day, you're going to be much less likely to go for the cheats and sneaks, as one woman put it, cheats and sneaks. And if you do, you're going to be more aware of it, because a couple hours after you do that, your ketones are going to crash, and you're going to and then just start over, figure it out. And sometimes that's inadvertent. You go out to eat, and you have a salad dressing, and you think it's okay because they told you, oh yeah, it's olive oil and whatever. And it turns out it was like balsamic vinaigrette, and that can kill your ketones. Or people find out there's ways that they find out that they're being non-compliant through the use of that kind of testing. And if those strips are turning deep purple, that's very rewarding, and it validates what they're doing. And it's just, people have to be accountable for their food choices. It's that simple. And that's one way to check your accountability for your food choices. If you're not looking, how do you know? I read a study one time, and it was a self-reported Atkins diet, and all these things had gone wrong for him. It was a really poorly written study. And there was absolutely no, I'm looking at this and going, well, what were his ketone levels like? Well, they must have at least tested urine. No, they went by his report that he was following an Atkins diet. what the heck did that mean? It was, then there's a lot of that kind of meaningless research out there. Masquerading as research, that's not even research. But those are the kinds of things that get put into people's heads. It's, no, I'm going to get, this is going to go wrong, or I can't do it, my doctor said I'm going to lose weight. You don't have to lose weight on this diet. It's a weight loss diet, yeah. Celebrities lose weight and they report on it. But you don't have to lose weight on this diet. But you do have to do, I should make this really clear, calorie restriction is important, but calorie restriction doesn't mean that you have to cut out 20 or 30% of your calories. It may mean that you're just moving everything into a really tight window and allowing a long period of time between dinner one night and your first meal the next day. That is a form of calorie restriction. So for people who are low weight, that's the way to do it. For everybody, that should be the way. You should be doing it. I certainly do it. I want to stay healthy. I want to be pedaling top speed when I go off the cliff. I don't want to be hobbling off in my walker. So, this diet has, my thing is cancer, but my husband and I both do this for health reasons. We don't have cancer, but we're doing it for health reasons. It's different for different things. If somebody has brain cancer or a newly diagnosed solid tumor, I want them to be at or below that glucose ketone of 1.0. So in younger people, they're going to get into the 60s, no problem. Younger people are still really flexible, so you get mid-60s, 70s, and they're going to have higher ketones. So for them, I'm gonna aim for 60, 65, 70 with ketones at 3, 3.5, 4. Older people are not ever gonna get those numbers. But that doesn't mean this isn't gonna be effective for them, because I see it all the time. It is effective for them. It's just that their numbers are gonna be in the mid-80s, maybe 90, and their ketones are rarely gonna get above 1 or 1.5. It's still effective, it's still therapeutic. Women, their bodies respond differently than men on a lot of different levels. And women should not be comparing themselves to men. And women should not be turned off by what's out there about a hormone disruption. Again, if you're doing this right, there's a minimal disruption to the hormones in the first few months. And my feeling is it's like all this talk about, missing your period. Well, what does cancer treatment do to you? It's like, so what if you miss your period for a month or two? You're fighting cancer. That's the goal. So, it just really bothers me to think that there are people who won't do this for that reason. Or that, women think that they have to give up, some women think that they have to give up dairy because of the connection with estrogen, estrogen cancers. But what they're not tuning into is sometimes people have a cancer that's not estrogen sensitive, and then it doesn't become an issue. Or for the ones that are estrogen sensitive, is there some leeway in there? Is there some amount of play? And I talked to Dr. Fine today about his study. He's going to start a clinical trial with women with breast cancer. And I said, are you going to be looking at that? They're on the estrogen sensitive ones, are you going to be looking at dietary intake of dairy fats? And he said, well, it'll be in the food logs. And I said, well, it really needs to be built into what you're going to look at, into the data that you're going to look at, and just looking at the outcomes, not projecting whether it's causal or not. But do the women who abstain from dairy fats do better than the women who don't? And I think that we need to answer that question, because a lot of people come to me with that one. I think most people do. It depends on the degree of calorie restriction, first of all, because if you're calorie restricting, then the percentage of fat is going to look, it's going to look different when you have a limited number of calories than when you're having full calories. So, but in general, I would say about 80 to 85% fat will do it for most adults, and keeping protein low. So in somebody with a solid cancer or brain tumor, I want to keep protein at about 8% of the macronutrient, whereas somebody has systemic cancer and there's a lot of need for repair and maintenance, then they may need to go 12, 13, 14% on the protein. And then the carbohydrates, there's kind of a range in there. So if people are going to pick blueberries and squash, I'm going to keep them lower on the carbs than for somebody who's just eating non-starchy vegetables. I don't think non-starchy vegetables make a huge difference in your numbers. You may need to keep it a little tighter in the beginning, but over time you can liberalize that and have a wider variety of the non-starchy vegetables. So, I look at like 12 to 20 for cancer. You can range higher. You can go 30 or 40 for health improvement to start. And then over time you can even liberalize that. But protein, boy, I really think it, unless you're an athlete or unless you're recovering from a surgery or recovering from chemotherapy, you really need to keep that protein low in cancer. And then the fat just makes up the balance of the energy needs. And that is, the quality and quantity of fat is a really important part of it. But boy, I'd need about 3 hours if we were to get into the quality and quantity of fat, because, as we're seeing with ketone supplementation, you could take in ketone supplements and you're counting them as energy, okay? But you may be peeing them out. There may be, if you're not using them, you're not storing them, then, so they're not going to be available to you as a form of energy, as a form of stored energy. So you either use them or they're gone. So that whole world of ketone supplementation is just so new. And so some of my concerns with ketone supplementation is the amount of salts and it's not just sodium, they're using magnesium and calcium salts too. And I don't know how that plays into things. I think we do need research there. Yeah, and it really varies according to the cancer, because what might be helpful for one, like CoQ10, might be really helpful for one person. But if somebody is in a standard of care therapy, CoQ10 as an antioxidant may work against their therapy. And that holds true for other concentrated forms of like antioxidants or some of the phenols, like green tea. I don't have a problem with people drinking green tea, but there are certain protocols where people are advised not to take green tea extracts. But as far as supplements go, I think we need to cover our bases, because you are in some ways limiting the range of nutrients that you would have been getting. And so a multivitamin that covers the bases and has some of the micro minerals as well. But as far as like the macro minerals like calcium, I think that our guidelines overstate calcium. So I think people need to go lower and not calcium carbonate. And I think we have underestimated our need for magnesium. And chemo and proton pump inhibitors, they all deplete magnesium. So we've underestimated that need. We need to bring that up, but not as magnesium oxide, which is what most of the people I'm working with, if they're taking magnesium, that's what they're taking, it's poor. And then, there's a few things like fish oil for most people, but not appropriate for everyone. And vitamin D. It's not shocking to me anymore. It used to be shocking when I would say to somebody, well, what's your vitamin D level? Because I don't like to do a vitamin D recommendation unless I know what their baseline level is. And they wouldn't know, so they'd go off and get it. It'd be like 18. I had one as low as 9. Now, the guidelines, the range is 30, but 30 to me is deficient. It's not optimal. So, I like to base the vitamin D on what will bring them up to 50, 60, 70. And again, you got to be careful with these, because vitamin D supplementation in somebody with a history of kidney stones can precipitate problems. Magnesium in somebody with renal issues. And they need to talk to their renal specialist about this before you add magnesium. So, it's kind of personalized. So I have a list of things that I think are essential, and then everything else is just, let's look at your cancer. Where's the evidence for your cancer? And I like higher grade evidence. I don't like one paper, 3 years ago that showed it killed cancer cells in a petri dish somewhere. That to me is not a valid reason to add supplements. And there's so many of the botanicals that have an anticoagulant effect that when you start combining them along with, with or without a chemotherapy drug, sometimes I'll start with somebody and I'll look at their list and I'll go, do you have bruising? And they'll go, well, yeah. I go, well, you better, let's look at this and let's thin the herd a little bit, because a lot of what you're taking is contributing to that. And they might have low platelets on top of it. And then, there's some that lower blood pressure, which is not a problem for most people, but the diet lowers blood pressure too. So if you're combining the diet, the diuretic, effect of the diet, and they're taking some high blood pressure medication and maybe a diuretic, those are the things that complicate getting the information you need off the internet, unless you're really astute and up to reading science and being able to separate out what you need. And some people are really good at that, but the majority of people, they need a little guidance here. And I don't know how to get that kind of guidance out to that number of people, because it does require a level of understanding that most people aren't coming to this. They develop it. I met with a group of women last night with ovarian cancer. They weren't ovarian cancer specialists. They weren't diet specialists. They weren't nutrition, sleep. That wasn't on their radar when they came into it in general. But it's on their radar now, and they have this support group that they've created for themselves. And man, the questions they were asking were really good questions. People can educate themselves. They do educate themselves. They need a little help. I do. I love fasting for people who are doing this for weight loss. But they've got to have a few days worth of meals all planned out and tested, because what I've seen that doesn't work is they fast, they get these great numbers, they lose some weight, and then they don't know what they're going to eat. They don't know how to eat a keto-friendly meal. It's not a keto-friendly meal. So, and then there's all that discouragement, and that's really, that doesn't work for people. The type of for people with cancer, the type of fasting that it's that intermittent fasting I was talking about, the narrowing the eating window, but also short-term fasting, where they are not eating before their chemo infusion. If they're doing infusion, you can't do this on a daily chemo drug, but they're not eating before, they're not eating the day of, they're not eating till the morning after, and you think, oh my God, how can you do that to someone? There is research, and I love to send them the research. So there are papers out there that show that, and there are studies, ongoing studies, that show that this reduces the GI side effects, so that, why eat if it's going to make you sick? And it doesn't cause the kind of weight loss that you might think it would, because they tend to compensate then afterwards. But that short-term fasting around a chemo infusion increases that pressure that we were talking about. It reduces the side effects of the drugs, and it sensitizes the already, the deficient cells, the cancer cells, the mitochondria are not working right anyway, and now they don't have the fuel that they need, and they're going to be more sensitive to the chemotherapy drug. Actually, thank you for bringing that up, because cancer cachexia is one of the one of the areas that I would like to see a lot more research, because there's some evidence that says branched chain amino acids will be helpful, and then there's some evidence that says branched chain amino acids may stimulate the mTOR pathway and result in cancer progression. But at what point and at what amount will that happen? I want to see the branched chain amino acids used for people to, possibly to slow down the cancer cachexia. One of the more discouraging things for me is pancreatic cancer. And it's not because it can't be addressed with a ketogenic diet, because it can. But usually people are sucked into the system really quickly, and they're sent off for a Whipple procedure or something where they take out, here's the Whipple. Try doing a ketogenic diet after this. It can be done. But this is what they do in a Whipple. They take out part of your stomach, they take out your duodenum, and they take out part of the pancreas, and then they kind of connect things up again and expect that you're gonna like not develop a problem with eating. But I have this guy right now, he's 69 years old. He's on a cruise this week. He's on a cruise. He had to stop his chemotherapy because it was too toxic for him. And so instead he found the diet, and he tried to do it by himself for a couple of weeks, and then he contacted me, and it didn't take much tweaking, it really didn't. And you know, he's combined it with metformin. He's a 15-year diabetic, so he was already taking metformin. He just upped the dosage. And he's got great numbers, and his last scan was stable. And he was the one that insisted on watching weight. He didn't want to try another chemo. He was done with that for now. And so that was stable, and now he's up for another one in February, and we're hoping this one will be stable. And he's beginning a couple of those non-toxic drugs. He's going to be combining those to see if he can actually get some shrinkage of what remains of the tumor. So, you know, this, like I said, he's 69 years old. And so most people, he had the Whipple. He had this Whipple procedure. So he should not be able to do this diet, and he's doing great.